You know, I was reading today that CNN is reporting that ICE is now raiding agricultural communities in California, which will really damage the economy of California. And California subsidizes most of the red states in this country. And so those people that voted for Donald Trump are going to be affected by what ICE is doing. The other thing that let me ask you something.
Why don't people know that already? I mean, it's so obvious.
It's so obvious, but this is about economics as well. And I'll also say this, you know, this is, I think Trump is not doing this just for optics. I think that this is a test case so that he can dismantle some of our institutions. I think it's a power grab. I think he is trying to use the might of the military to suppress people's rights. I think that is very clear. When you use the military against your own citizens, that is a sign of fascism.
It started just like any other morning on The View Smiles, coffee cups, and hot takes. But this time, the topic was Los Angeles. Not the glitz, not the sunshine, but the chaos. Riots were breaking out in the city, with Molotov cocktails, police under attack, and cars lit up like bonfires. So, how did the ladies of The View react? Did they condemn it? Not even close.
I was trying to kind of get into the head of Donald Trump on what he's doing around this, and I think most of this is driven by politics. What I think he's doing is he is baiting liberals and liberal governors like Gavin Newsom into taking the bait and adopting rhetoric that he thinks is going to be divisive and damaging ahead of the midterm. So what he wants to happen is he wants Newsom and Democrats to start chanting things like defund ICE, defund the police, because we know that hurt Kamala Harris. We know it hurt Tim Walz. They had to run away from those previous positions, and he's trying to create that sort of standoff right now. But here's the problem. Most Americans oppose rioting. That's just across the board. They may generally be like, if there's violence, if police officers are getting hurt, they don't like this.
They spun it, defended it, justified it. These are the same women who cried for days over the Capitol riot on January 6th. They called it the darkest day in America, the end of democracy, a direct attack on everything sacred. But now that the violence fits their politics, suddenly the fires in LA are protests? The violence is understandable? And the law breaking? It's brushed aside. No outrage. No tears. Just silence and smirks. The hypocrisy isn't just shocking, it's insulting.
I just want to say, you know, construction places, you're going to have a harder time finding people who are going to be able to come and do your house. Who are they going to get to pick all the fruit and the vegetables? Because Americans don't want to do it. We know that. The farmers are saying the Americans don't want to do this.
And the tariffs on top of that is going to make everything so expensive.
Well, that too, but getting people,
it's a mess.
Food is going to be sitting and rotting because there's no one to grab it, is my...
They claim to stand for justice, but their reaction changes depending on who's holding the torch. By the way, before we continue, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us grow and bring more stories like this to light. Now let's continue.
Can you tell me which one is the riot in Los Angeles and which is the celebration for the Eagles?
Yeah. Philadelphia loves to burn itself down.
Also
bad.
But was the National Guard sent in when
well, that's the
was
point.
burning?
The National Guard was not, well, that's the point.
Yeah. Where's the National Guard?
In part,
I have a question.
Yeah. So, well, the difference is there's an agenda.
Because this wasn't just a slip of the tongue or a bad segment, it was a full display of how disconnected The View is from reality, and we're just getting started. Then came Sunny Hostin, arms folded, face serious, voice trembling with self-righteous fire. She didn't just defend what was happening, she spun it into some twisted anti-Trump conspiracy. She claimed that Donald Trump was using the situation in California to grab power, to dismantle institutions, to test how far he could go in using military force on American soil. She called it fascism. Yes, fascism.
This is where I put a little bit of onus on Governor Newsom. Show that you have the police force to stop the unrest and that it is completely unnecessary to have the National Guard there, to have U.S. troops there, because you can't deny the imagery that you're seeing. There are cars being lit on fire. There are police officers being attacked. There are guardsmen being attacked.
Though?
So to be honest, I don't really care. If you're hurting police officers, if you're damaging property, that you should get your day in court for.
But nothing was happening like that until they sent the National Guard.
This is where it's on the governor to say, let's make this the biggest peaceful protest in history, but the second it gets gets violent, the governor needs to crack down and show he's capable of policing.
As if calling in the National Guard to protect citizens and enforce federal law was the same thing as declaring martial law in a dictatorship. According to her, sending officers to stop violent rioters was an attack on democracy itself. What she didn't mention? The videos, the footage, the actual scenes from LA, where rioters weren't just marching, they were throwing explosives, smashing windows, assaulting law enforcement, and setting entire blocks on fire.
Sort of, it's the largest state and it has a GDP that's larger than many countries. And so I think we have to look at what's happening from a bird's eye perspective and look at the why. Trump is militarizing that state as a test run, to make sure that he can do it in places like New York, that he can do it in other sanctuary cities. And so there is a plan to this, in my view, and I really think that there's no question that the
LAPD, that has 9,000 police officers, could have handled this quite well.
But for Sunny, none of that mattered. Because in her world, anything Trump does, no matter what it ISIS evil by default. This is what happens when ideology eats away at logic. This is when someone becomes so consumed by political hatred, they can't even acknowledge facts right in front of them. And that disconnect, it's not just embarrassing, it's dangerous. Because when you excuse violence for your side, you give permission for it to keep happening. And remember, this is only the beginning of what went down on that panel. The craziest part is still coming. Now, this is where Alyssa stepped in and she didn't hold back. While the rest of the panel tiptoed around the chaos, Alyssa dropped a truth bomb right in the middle of the conversation. She said it plain and clear. Trump wasn't starting the fire, he was exposing the game.
Can I just say, I don't want to be superficial, but Gavin Newsom brings me back to really handsome presidents like JFK and Obama. And wouldn't it be nice to have an articulate, gorgeous president like that again?
She explained how he was baiting Democrats like Gavin Newsom into saying the quiet part out loud, into embracing radical slogans like defund ICE and abolish the police. Not because Trump wanted chaos, but because he knew those slogans were political poison. They destroyed Kamala Harris. They tanked Tim Walz. The second Democrats start chanting that again. Voters turn away in droves. And here's the twist. Alyssa pointed out that most Americans, whether they lean left or right, hate rioting. They don't want to see fireworks launched at cops or stores getting ransacked. People might sympathize with a cause, but the moment it turns violent, that sympathy evaporates. Gavin Newsom knew this. He could have stepped in, stopped it, called for order, but he didn't. He let it burn. Why? Alyssa said it's because Newsom believed that violence could actually pressure the federal government to back off immigration enforcement. He was banking on chaos to block deportations. That's not just bad policy, that's reckless power playing with people's lives and property on the line. And it only gets darker from here. The deeper you dig, the uglier it gets. Alyssa didn't stop with just exposing Newsom's political game, she laid out the whole playbook. And it was brutal. According to her, this wasn't about compassion or human rights or fairness, it was about power. She said Democrats aren't interested in securing the border or enforcing immigration law. No, their goal is mass amnesty. Because once they legalize tens of millions of illegal immigrants, they gain a permanent voting bloc, a new loyal base. That's the plan flood, the system, promise benefits, and lock-in votes for generations. Alyssa pointed to real examples. Remember when Democrats in Congress refused to honor the family of Laken Riley, the young woman murdered by an illegal immigrant? Or when they flew in taxpayer dollars down to El Salvador to fight deportation of an MS-13 gang member? Those aren't isolated cases, they're part of a bigger pattern. And now, in LA, Democrats are turning a blind eye as protesters attack ICE agents in broad daylight. This isn't about civil rights, it's about protecting a system of lawlessness that benefits them. Alyssa's message was crystal clear. Trump didn't manufacture this mess. He forced Democrats to show their hand. And what that revealed? It's not pretty, it's not safe. And it's not the country most Americans want to live in. And just when you thought it couldn't get more unhinged, Whoopi Goldberg jumped in with a take so outrageous, it left people speechless. She actually tried to compare the violent riots in Los Angeles to a sports celebration. You heard that right cars being torched, cops dodging fireworks, and federal agents getting assaulted, according to Whoopi. It's just like when the Eagles win a Super Bowl. She asked, "Can you even tell the difference between the riots and a celebration? Like drunk fans flipping over a car is the same as organized mobs hurling Molotov cocktails to stop deportations." The panel nodded like this made sense, but it doesn't, not even close. Here's the thing. People might act wild after a game, sure, but that's not the same as trying to shut down federal law enforcement with fire and violence. That's not a celebration. That's terrorism. It's not just vandalism. It's politically motivated chaos meant to intimidate and control. And Whoopi acting like it's just some silly misunderstanding? That's dangerous. It's this kind of denial that gives violent radicals the green light. When high-profile figures pretend it's no big deal, when they laugh it off or shift blame, they're not helping anyone. They're making sure it happens again, and they're telling law-abiding people your safety doesn't matter. And still, Gavin Newsom wasn't done defending the indefensible. Right after Whoopi's wild comparison, Alyssa went back and this time putting Gavin Newsom directly in the spotlight. She pointed to the footage that everyone had already seen: burning vehicles, injured officers, looted stores. This wasn't speculation. It wasn't political spin. It was raw reality, playing out in real time. And what did Newsom do? He stood in front of cameras and called it a peaceful protest. Peaceful? With riot squads on the street and flames lighting up the skyline? Alyssa wasn't having it. She said this was where the governor had to step up, prove that California could handle its own problems without begging for the National Guard or federal troops. But instead, Newsom acted like the violence wasn't even happening. He tried to sell a fantasy, while real people and small businesses were getting crushed. Alyssa slammed him for turning California into a lawless zone and said plainly, "This is what happens when leadership fails." And let's be honest, Gavin Newsom's political career is dying on live TV. The man has taxed Californians into the ground, opened the doors wide for illegal immigration, and forced every crazy woke policy he could onto the state. Now it's burning literally, and he's pretending nothing's wrong. And while the fires were still burning in LA, the panic started spreading to other sanctuary cities, because suddenly the Trump administration wasn't bluffing, it was moving. Sunny Hostin tried to pull the camera back to give what she called a bird's-eye view of the situation, but instead of offering clarity, she doubled down on the fear-mongering. She warned that what Trump was doing in California was just a test Runa warm-up act for something bigger. According to her, he was preparing to roll out military-style immigration enforcement in places like New York and Chicago next. She sounded the alarm. Sanctuary cities were next on the list, and she wasn't wrong about that. Because as ICE ramped up operations and federal agents moved into neighborhoods that used to be untouchable, mayors across the country started sweating. They realized this wasn't symbolic, it was real. And there was nowhere left to hide. But the real kicker came when Sunny admitted that the LAPD, with over 9,000 officers, could have handled the violence without the National Guard. Think about that. She knew the local force had the manpower, but it wasn't used. Why? Because the political cost of cracking down on peaceful protests was too high. So instead, leaders let chaos unfold, let the streets burn, let federal agents take the hits. Also, they could keep pretending nothing was wrong so they wouldn't have to admit the truth, that their soft-on-crime, open-border policies had finally caught up with them. And now, for thousands living in sanctuary cities, the message was loud and clear: cooperate with ICE. Or watch this chaos come to your front door. The warning wasn't just for city officials, it was for the illegal immigrants themselves. The video's narrator didn't sugarcoat it. He said, "This is your last chance. Self-deport now." Trump's administration had drawn a line. If you ignored deportation orders, if you thought having a child on U.S. soil would protect you, those days were over. He described it as a final offer leave peacefully, maybe even with a little financial help and a ticket home. But if you stayed and resisted, you'd be dragged out. Not quietly, not gently. And once that happened, you'd never come back. The window had closed, and the message couldn't be clearer. The law will be enforced, whether you like it or not. And this wasn't just about Trump setting a policy, it was about cleaning up a disaster that the Biden administration had created. Years of leniency, of looking the other way, had convinced thousands that they were safe forever. that sanctuary cities would shield them, but the riots in LA broke that illusion. They brought the consequences right to the surface. The threat was no longer abstract. It was visible, loud, violent, and for the first time in years, people were realizing that ignoring federal law doesn't come without a price. And yet somehow, after all the fire, all the outrage, The View found a way to hit an even lower note. Just when you thought it couldn't get any more ridiculous, Joy Behar opened her mouth and out came one of the most embarrassing moments on television. With riots still smoldering in LA, cops in hospitals, and small businesses reduced to ash, Joy looked into the camera and said, "Gavin Newsom is just so handsome." Not smart, not competent, not capable, handsome. She compared him to JFK and Obama, swooning like a teenager at a boy band concert. She actually said it would be nice to have an articulate, gorgeous president like that again, as if looks and charm are all it takes to run the most powerful state in the country, or worse, the entire nation. Forget the economic disaster in California. Forget the homelessness, the crime, the tax hikes, the broken high-speed rail. None of that matters, apparently, if the guy has slick hair and a smile. This wasn't just cringe, it was insulting, not just to viewers, but especially to women, because what Joy did wasn't political commentary, it was fangirling. And it fed into every stereotype that says women vote with their feelings, not their brains. And the worst part? No one on that panel called it out. Instead of challenging his record, they flirted with his image, and in doing so, they showed us exactly why The View has become the most unserious, tone-deaf, low IQ show on television. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. Also, drop your thoughts in the comments. See you on the next one.